Okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming today. It's a very small group, I see. The weather must be way too nice outside. But I'm excited to have a variety of folks here today that are going to be talking about some examples of e-flow implementation programs in California. What we're going to do is we're going to do it a little bit like we did some of the previous seminars. We're going to start with a couple folks presenting an overview of their programs. Then we'll have everybody come up and we'll kind of just do a panel discussion here in the room, asking questions. We'll probably finish about 5 to 5:15, and then if you guys want to stay after for pizza and questions with everybody, we can do that. So first I'm going to introduce, this is Dave Gaeuman with the Trinity River Restoration Program, works with Bureau of Reclamation. The Trinity River Program is an interesting program in that I'm hoping Dave will tell us about it. It's been in place for a long time. They were one of the first programs to actually implement a functional flow regime. Close to probably 15 years ago now, 20. And so I'm excited to hear about Dave in particular is a geomorphologist, fluvial geomorphologist, who is involved with a lot of how the environmental flow regimes they're putting down are interacting with the channel habitat, doing some gravel augmentation to improve that channel habitat. And so we'll hear about that. Then I'm going to ask Josh Isreal with the Bureau of Rec to come up and talk about the Sacramento River Restoration Program with the Shasta Division. And he's going to tell us about their program. And then we'll take a moment, pause, we'll kind of transition, and I'll introduce everybody up here again when we do the panel. So thank you, Dave, for coming all the way down from Weaverville to come and talk to us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'm supposed to have 10 minutes, so if I ramble too long, you just have to tell me to shut up or something. Yeah, as Sarah said, so I'm with the Trinity River Restoration Program, and I work for Reclamation, but the program itself is a partnership of all these different agencies, a couple of Indian tribes, and you know, it's because of that there's politics, and I think that's a foreshadowing, I think. But just so you know where the Trinity is, I think you guys probably do. Here's Trinity Dam, Lewiston Dam, and the Trinity program is focused on like 40 miles of river right below those dams. But the Trinity itself is the biggest tributary of the Klamath, and brings into the Klamath over at Winnipeg on the Hoopa Valley Indian Reservation, and then goes on out to the ocean from there. And it's in California too. See? Oh, I see. This thing's showing me the next slide. Okay.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah. So, you know, before we get too much into what we're actually doing on the Trinity, some explanation as to why the Trinity is messed up. And you know, just like everywhere else in California, it was mined. You know, these are some of the hydraulic mining, you know, pictures from the old times. This all went on up on the hill slopes, dating back 100 years or so, 150 years. And you know, these guys washed all this debris off the hill slopes and just buried the valley in sediment through a lot of the river, as they did in a lot of California. And there's some more of those guys. I just think these are nice pictures. And then after they got through burying the river or burying the valley, then they came in with the dredgers and then they dredged it all, right? So this is right near Junction City. This is at a spot we've done a rehab site at. And that's another shot. I mean, that's just showing the magnitude. This is also just upstream from Junction City. This is a place, actually a site we're designing now called Oregon Gulch. And it pretty much looks like that today. I mean, the river's over there, that, you know, channel over on that side, there's just this huge area of dredge piles further over, you know, on the side. And then, you know, after all that happened, then, you know, then the dams went in. So Trinity Dam went in, started filling, and then the reservoir started filling in 1960. Lewiston Dam went in, finished in 63, and started diverting water over to the Central Valley. And the thing up at the top, what I'm saying there is there's lots of gravel in those tailing piles, but obviously dams stop gravel, so we don't have a lot of gravel in the river below the dam these days. So this is kind of what the plumbing looks like. Trinity Dam's the big storage reservoir up top. Lewiston's the re-regulation reservoir, and then there's the car tunnel that goes through the mountains and pipes all this over to the Sacramento Valley. These are diversions, or the percent of the Trinity water that was diverted over the years. And so right after the dams, you know, once when the diversion started, they were diverting almost all of the water, you know, like 90% some years. And it's been steadily coming down because after about 10 years of doing that, people looked and said, wow, this is really messing things up. And so it started coming down, and it's still coming down. Meanwhile, while all that was happening, there was all kinds of logging going on up in the uplands. This is all this decomposed granite that gets pumped out of. This is Grass Valley Creek was one of the really bad violators of delivering sand and very fine gravel from the decomposed granite. So the Trinity was a sand bed river for a while. So in 2000 is when the Department of Interior, the Secretary of Interior signed the Record of Decision and established a Trinity program as it is today. And it includes these 4 facets. We've got mechanical restoration, where we try to build habitat and kind of get the river so it can be more dynamic. There's restoration flows, the E-flows that we're talking about, and there's gravel augmentation. There's also some watershed work to try to control that sand coming from the tributaries. That's pretty well taken care of these days. We don't have all that sand anymore. So on gravel augmentations, we have several sites. These red asterisks show kind of where they are, where we can augment gravel, and we've been putting gravel in pretty consistently for the last decade or so. And actually, gravel augmentation started on the Trinity as far back in the 1970s, but it was not, it was kind of hit here and there and hit and miss and done differently. Our mechanical restoration, we want to create habitat now. This shows a site, the far left, yeah, it's far left for you guys. Over there is a place we built a few years ago. The red and blues are rearing habitat. That's before construction, and then after construction is the next picture. So, the point is that we try to make more rearing habitat with our construction, and also make it so the channel can be dynamic. Okay, so E-flows. There's the peak flows over the years. You can see they used to be really big, and they went to nothing. Now they're a little better since the Trinity program was restored, but they're still not that big. And that's one of our problems there, is that we can only release 11,000 CFS. It's just the infrastructure can't do better than that, really. And the Record of Decision only gives us 11,000 as a peak. Now we have just a little bit more than half the water still going to the Trinity River division of the Central Valley Project, but almost half of it stays in the basin. It kind of looks like this. These are what we call Record of Decision hydrographs. These are all from the Record of Decision days, 20 years ago now. Each part of this hydrograph has different purposes. The main ones, the obvious ones are these temperature targets for the summertime, and then the high peaks to do the geomorphic work and stimulate processes. So, but we don't do this so much anymore. Nowadays, we, like this is what we released in 2016, that blue line. So we had a couple of peaks. We're not as tightly tied to those rod hydrographs as we used to be, a lot more flexible, and we're looking at a lot of things, fortunately. So I didn't want to go on too long, so that's all I have. Yeah. And now I get to give this to you.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks. Okay, so this is Josh Isreal, like I said.
Another Aggie.
Oh, I know. I was going
There's
to bring
a
it
couple of
up.
us.
There's a couple. I was going to bring it up when you guys were on your panel. This is one of our alum. So UC Davis Aggie alum. So I'm sorry. Okay, there you go.
So I have a few slides that Sarah asked me to pull together about the Central Valley Project Shasta Division. So recently, we're in a large process right now, the Bureau of Reclamation in the Central Valley, working on a reinitiation of Endangered Species Act consultation for ESA listed salmonids and delta species, so particularly delta smelt. So I got some of these slides from a recent workshop we had on that, and I just wanted to sort of share with you guys some of the issues facing flow management in the Central Valley, and particularly in Shasta. So we just talked a little bit about the Trinity River, which is an important part of the Central Valley Project. That includes Shasta and Keswick Dam and the Upper Sacramento. It includes Folsom and Nimbus reservoirs and dams on the American River, New Melones on the Stanislaus River, Bryant in the Upper San Joaquin, and San Luis is a large reservoir that's south of the Delta. one of the interesting things about the Central Valley project is that it's operated as an integrated system across the Central Valley to meet the project purposes, of which there's many, which leads to there being many participants in the process as well. Some of the main functions of the project are flood control, river regulation. River regulation basically is navigational standards, which are still on the book from the early 20th century and late 19th century. Fish and wildlife needs, municipal and agricultural water supplies, both north of the Delta and south of the Delta. Power generation, which used to be really important and continues to be an important contributor to funds for restoration as part of the Central Valley project, although is competing with a lot of green energy now on the market, and we're starting to see a reduction in power generation funds across the Central Valley, which is impacting how we can meet fish and wildlife needs, actually. And then also recreation, a lot of these reservoirs. So the Shasta Division in particular, it's the largest reservoir. It's 4.5 million acre feet worth of storage. It's in a very wet part of the California. It gets about 5.5 million acre feet inflow annually. It has a really large power plant on it that can be used. And there's a number of fish and wildlife needs that we operate releases of flow and temperature from Shasta and Keswick dams for. So in particular, temperature management for winter run Chinook salmon, which is an endangered species. Also maintaining spawning habitat, trying to avoid red dewatering. And then we do operate Shasta as well, and this idea of an integrated system for Delta water quality and environmental needs in the Delta as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit. Sort of for perspective, Shasta, that's way up here, is about 5 days time from the Delta, where a lot of the water management issues associated with endangered species and getting water south of the Delta through the pumping plants in the southern Delta occur. And so a lot of times there's this reactionary sort of management issue in operating Shasta as well. And a lot of the reservoirs, like Folsom reservoirs, only 1 day away. Oroville's 3 days away. And so these reservoirs are sort of managed to balance the water quality and environmental needs in the Delta, as well as diversions from those systems. And like I said, there's a lot of participants in the discussions on fish and wildlife needs, the fish agencies, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries Service, Fish and Wildlife Service. We work pretty much on a daily basis with the agencies when fish and water are co-occurring to sort of avoid risks associated with operating the Central Valley project. And this is sort of a simplified model for inflows on the Sacramento River into the Delta, listed species, fish occurrence in the Delta, and the potential for exports. And I think that this is one of the biggest challenges facing environmental flows, is that California gets most of its water in Northern California in the winter time. It wants to be diverted, so most of the water, right, is coming in the winter and the spring. There is the period in the spring and winter when, you have sort of endangered species and water co-occurring, which really restricts the ability to divert water from the system. And so then you have to, move your sort of diversions and using the storage that you've created during the period when you could capture the natural flow in the summer and into the fall. And so that's one of the things that makes it tricky to sort of optimize for environmental flows. There are a lot of Bay Delta standards that are related to environmental standards. So not just water quality. So the bottom part of this table, this is the D1641 water quality permit terms for the Bay Delta. The standards on the bottom are the water quality standards, but the purpose for the ones on the top are really related to fish and wildlife. And you can see that every month of the year, there's a Delta regulations around what the ratio of diversions to inflow can be. And so many times we have to release water to have a certain amount of inflow to be able to capture a certain amount of water. And in the springtime and in the winter, there's habitat protection outflow as well. So there's quite a few sort of regulations on the books to maintain environmental flows in the delta, and it has to be typically maintained from reservoir releases during many water year types. So my last two slides are sort of an idea for what happened over the last water year and this current water year with Shasta. And so the upper left-hand slide is sort of the hydrograph. The blue line is the actual flow that year being released from Keswick. The orange line is the 10-year flow. I've sort of magnified flows under 10,000 CFS in that main figure there. And so you can see that orange is the 10-year average. The blue line is the flow from 2017. You can see a lot of times in the winter, you know, here in January, February, and March, releases are very low from Keswick. But 2017, as most people know, is an extraordinary water year. There was a lot of water. You can't even see the blue line on this figure because releases were much greater than 10,000 CFS. And so, you know, when we look at the Army Corps of Engineers flood regulations about how we need to release storage to avoid flood dangers, you can see that we were really in flood control all the way until pretty much early May. And then you can see that this blue line here, it comes back down. The releases from Keswick basically drop back down. And then we start to release water for diversions and to meet the D1641 water quality environmental flow standards throughout the summer. And then in the fall, also maintained X2, which is the location of salinity in the delta, which is important for Endangered Species Act habitat protection and is part of the Delta Smelt biological opinion. And that basically goes until the end of October. And then there's a little window when we were avoiding winter run Chinook red dewatering, and so we're maintaining habitat for some perched winter run Chinook salmon that had spawned over the summer when flows were really high. And then you can see this blue line here, we basically stabilize releases from Keswick to maintain spawning habitat for fall run Chinook salmon. We use some models that look at the spawning time and the emergence of eggs to determine when to sort of try to make these ramp downs because we don't actually know when endangered fish have left the redds where they were incubating. And so, you know, this is sort of a best estimate based on the fisheries agencies all talking about that. Now, habitat sort of flows, right, for spawning at the end of the spawning incubations, the egg incubation season, then become red dewatering avoidance flows, right? So now we're trying, now in a season like, now we're into 2018 when we haven't had a very large water year, we haven't had a lot of precipitation. We're trying to find ways to conserve cold water now. So trying to maintain that habitat for spawning of salmon is now trying to avoid dewatering those redds at the end of their spawning period. And then we go into trying to maintain flows. So again, we reduced flows. This blue line here is the flows being released from Keswick. So then we had about a month and a half at the beginning of 2018 where we were maintaining flows for late fall run Chinook salmon. And now we've reduced flows even more. The river's Keswick releases are about 3,500 or 3,250 right now because we're trying to minimize releases to build up cold water for summer incubation of winter run Chinook salmon eggs. And so there is a real balance in this challenge between summer seasonal water temperature management and winter and fall monthly delta outflow requirements for flow and fisheries and water quality standards. And, you know, I'm one of those kinds of people who always thinks that the sort of cup is more than half full. And so, one of the things that I think we're trying to work on is improving our monitoring and understand where fish are so we can look at the exposure of endangered species based on their distribution and adaptively manage better so that we can use flows sort of more in a more focused way for improving biological responses and biological outcomes for fish. And then I think another thing that people should be thinking about is when we're working on monthly average outflow targets or monthly average water quality targets, if there's ways to disaggregate those periods, that would really probably be beneficial because you might be able to have some flexibility in providing some kind of additional environmental flows during that month, but have the same average effect. And that's my last slide.
We'll just leave that there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you guys to come on up, and I'll introduce you folks. And so I've already introduced Josh and Dave. Got to hear their spiel. This is Trinity River with CNP. She works quite a bit with environmental throughout the state. Has worked with the shop division program. Is familiar with the Tentative river flows. I've asked Julie to sort of play moderator today because she's familiar with the program a little bit, but questions from the audience too. And this is Rene Henery with Trout Unlimited, also UCB IB alum. So I'm very happy to have we got to be the front end of our UCB's IB alum sphere. And Rene works with some of the habitat restoration programs that are going to be with the Tentative River. And Trout Unlimited as an NGO and Tennessee as an NGO work actively with agencies like you guys really from the previous seminars to really help to try to balance objectives and meet these objectives. So I'm excited to have you guys all here. Thank you guys for coming. And I will just start off by saying one of the things that I found intriguing about both these programs and why I asked you guys to come today was that Trinity River and Sacramento River Restoration Program are active environmental flow programs that are working to balance environmental flow objectives, but there's also consideration of habitat in both. They talked a little bit about groundwater augmentation and ways to improve how flow is interacting with the channel. And I know that with the Sac River, both with the management of the flows and trying to do some habitat restoration there's consideration of how flows are interacting with the channel. And so I'm going to sort of leave it at that. I'll open it up to questions, but I'm also happy to ask questions too, because I'm interested to hear about how those interactions between flow and channel habitat are happening as well. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll go ahead and open it up. Thank you, guys.
I had a question for Dave. You showed the graph of the record of decision, sort of typical seasonal cycle of flows, but then you said that's not what we do. I didn't catch why you do it differently.
Yeah, that's kind of fast. So the record decision has these like recommended hydrographs, and what was on that slide was the normal year hydrograph. So it defines 5 different water year types, from critically dry, normal, wet, extremely wet. Each water year has what's called rod hydrograph associated with it, and they all look kind of like that. They have a different water volume, but they are kind of these blocky things that go up to a peak, they're flat, and that sort of thing. And over the years, we used to always implement pretty much a rod hydrograph. And it was really like pulling teeth to even tweak it just a little bit, And over the last probably 5 years, we kind of busted out of that cage a little bit, and are now coming up with funny hydrographs like that double peak one that I showed that really deviate a lot from the rod hydrographs. We just have to maintain the same water volume. We have a prescribed water volume, and we have a cap. You can't go over 11,000 CFS. So then all those different purposes that I alluded to, temperature, geomorphic work, because you need water to push the gravel around that we're putting in, and load banks and stuff like that. There's an awful lot of different objectives, and people, we can get all kind of wrapped around the axle on things like, worrying about the elevated frogs and everything you can think of. But in the end, we have meetings about this many people arguing about what we're going to use, and we end up with what we end up with.
So the altered hydrograph that you do is because you found that that's better, or you're just trying other things as kind of adaptive management?
Well, so I'm a geomorphologist, so I'm mostly interested in
in the rock roller ground. That particular hydrograph, one thing we noticed with the raw hydrographs is they all had 5-day benches, heat benches. And we do bedroom and sediment, transport sampling. And we started seeing the transport rates were dropping off quite a bit after a couple of days of that heat. And so we kind of were going, well, what if, do we really need 5 days of that heat? Maybe we shorten that peak. And then once we shorten the peak, then we kind of had to go, well, maybe if we have the 2 peaks, the second peak will kick back up to, a higher transport rate again, like first peak. And so there's some experimental stuff like that. I mean, that particular hydrograph showed us that most of the transport occurred on that first peak. So you probably won't need 2 peaks like that anymore because doesn't appear to be an effective efficient use of the water we have.
So follow-up question on the 5 water-year hydrographs. My understanding is the water year is rich speculative. So you have 5 different hydrographs for each water year. How do you implement the hydrograph from the type of water year that's the water year that's occurred?
So every year we have a water year declaration, and that comes from the April 1st forecast on what's going to be in the Trinity, and actually everything above the fluid stream. So, that's being worked up right now. And at the first of each month, beginning, I think, in maybe the January one, January, February, March, April, we get what they think the water year is going to be. And obviously, if we get further into the spring, it becomes less uncertainty about that. And the April 1st forecast, that's what we go with.
Okay. So it's a forecasted water, not a determination of what the water water was.
No, it's pretty current.
It's worth noting that uses in a lot of different programs. And depending on what the forecast usually has a level of certainty, depending on what level of certainty you go with, you end up being more or less conservative on the side of water or on the side of the environment. Like on a developing restoration program, for example, almost all the years we end up shorting the environment and water because of the forecast that we use. It's definitely like an imperfect science that has consequences.
Would it be the 90% excuse?
Totally, and usually wrong.
But that is also coming because of the snowfall. So it's snow-dependent rivers. You cannot look at how much snow do you have by April 1st and start making your plan. But there are some other systems that they are more rain-fed. And those are the ones that is what you're saying. You're just rolling the dice, praying for some rain for certain periods, but not having that much control up front. Yeah.
The comment on the percent, yeah, so you go to 90.
It depends on the year. I think when it gets really dry, people get nervous and tend to go to 90. And it's not a hard and fast rule of this kind of thing, or 99, yeah. But during the drought, people were 90 or 99, yeah. Other years of it slightly, they go with the 50.
We used the 50, but there was somebody trying to sneak in some language to use the 90 once, and it kind of, there's a little kerfuffle about it. Yeah, take that.
Yeah.
I have a question. So, what the agencies do when you're in a situation where you cannot meet the requirement, let's say in laws? So, do agencies talk to each other or around model, or can you try to harvest, or how do you manage in situations where you cannot meet the requirement? They say that
I have 2 experiences on that. And I think the first one is a little bit like what you guys are doing, where you're saying, okay, we have a volume. How do we want to use that volume? And seeing if you can maybe meet some kind of, at least do a discussion about what's the biological objective, which often isn't clearly stated. And by acknowledging that you're trying to achieve something biologically and get a response from lower temperature, then you can try to optimize that and see if there's a more flexible way that might, require less water to do it, or maybe even some non-flow action or something like that. So I think when you can't meet all the regulatory requirements, at least what are we trying to achieve, and then we find an alternative way of doing it that might still meet the desired outcome. I think an example of that might be like outflow to Delta, and really trying to understand where Delta smelt water distributed and how important outflow is to that versus habitat and locality where fish actually are, instead of outflow across the entire Delta. Another experience I've had, for instance, is the experience with the recent drought, where, for multiple years, because of not being able to meet water quality standards and environmental flow standards and temperature management standards, we had to go and ask for, temporary urgency change petitions because of the emergency of the California drought, so that we could effectively, manage the system in a way that still, met some of the regulatory requirements. And so that's what happened is we had to have a lot of intensive discussions with regulatory agencies about how best to meet the needs of, of the water users, the environment, and other stakeholder groups that were interested.
Yeah, I think for the most part, they try to automate these decisions to some extent. I mean, there's obviously a lot of meetings where we talk about it, but it's sort of like if you're in this gear type, that means like you have these conditions, this is what you're going to do. But when you get something that's really dry, you kind of, the rules all go away, and then it becomes a big discussion with stakeholders about what you're going to do. Sometimes that's just agencies, sometimes there's other people in the room. An example would be the American River. So there's a temperature management plan where they have a water use designation and they cold water pool volume, and they say, okay, this is what we think we can meet for temperature for steelhead over summer based on that. But if you meet certain conditions of low water, it becomes a conference here, which is just everybody gets in the room and talks about it. And they're like, what do you think we can do? More or less. You kind of get into real-time monitoring a lot. So we had some side channels that were, we had fish spawning in them. They got really low where they weren't even connected to the main channel anymore. And so we would just go out and monitor reds and look for signs that we needed to put maybe a full flow or something like that.
Every year you make new mistakes and you have some successes. Do you write these things up? And do you have that great example of your sediment transport? You have sort of science that goes on to monitor that stuff and then write it out and see how it matches with what models might exist. I mean, I can see a lot of potential for learning a lot over time if you had sort of a science program that went along with the management program.
Yeah, and what we do, like that graphic I put up, I didn't explain it all, but it has a dot all over it. That was all the phone transport measurements. And in that particular region, and actually I brought them around that computer there, it's the GeoPoint, where we have the repeat multi-beam surveys through that during the release. And so we're watching all that sediment move around, but that particular 2016 has not been published yet. It's just, I got behind. I mean, but the 2015 stuff is published, so there's always published stuff that you can on the monitoring we're doing in that week.
So I just wondered if there's sort of an annual report of what did you learn this year, what went well, what went poorly, so that you can update it for next year. Is there any sort of long-term model adjustments that you make to reflect these kinds of things you can learn?
It's not probably as systematic as it should be.
One thing that I think complicates that on a lot of rivers is that the regulatory thresholds that we have to maintain aren't necessarily tied with quantitative biological outcomes that you hypothesize or want to design from those regulatory thresholds. So you can measure whether or not you met a particular threshold. In other words, like some of the drought meters where you compromise is we're going to go a couple degrees below the normal standards for fish. Nobody has necessarily articulated what you expect the outcome of that to be. You expect that to be you're going to lose a percentage of the population, you're going to lose a temporal percentage, and so there's not like a testable hypothesis built in to facilitate the flavor of adaptive management we're talking about. And one of the things that's going on right now is a big effort to develop those quantitative objectives for the rivers in the Central Valley so that we can actually realize the kind of adaptive management vision that we've written into a lot of our documents over time and haven't really been positioned to do.
I think if I saw $1 for every time adaptive management we could, we could get the whole science.
Right, totally. A lot of people don't even really know what it means because it hasn't been attempted in the past.
So I think they spent all that money on status and trend monitoring for the ecosystem because much of the flow standards are established on is water quality protected for the environment. Are we meeting, the location of X2 or some kind of water quality standard that is a reflection of what we think is going on with habitat. So there is definitely that tension between species-specific biological response objectives, which I think are very useful if you think that there's a mechanistic linkage between how flow and temperature are affecting growth, survival, distribution, abundance, life history variation of species. But there also is a broader desire where people think that flow management is really responsible for the ecosystem. And so that is using every dollar that we put into saying that management to be so much that it takes away from actually being able to have science programs that monitor biological responses and adaptively managed based on results that are in the field. The status and trend is something you have to study for 10, 20, 40, 60 years to be able to see what the pattern
This
is.
is a way to document failure, but not a very good way to prepare for success.
Right, to apply science and like a real application for a framework. One other thing that just this factor, slightly tangential, but important in the dynamic is that those standards that we have that the flow is trying to meet are in some cases antiquated vis-a-vis our understanding of what the stressors are in the system. In other cases, in most cases, specific to species that are threatened or endangered, but being applied to stretch so that they can meet the needs of a broader variety of species. And so we end up in these cases where the compromises that are made for a bigger suite of species, but they have to fit within a regulatory paradigm that necessitates, meeting the needs of very particular few suite of species, because that's where leverage to get the water is coming from. And then add on top of that, then in the case of the SAC, with winter run, you're trying to meet the needs of the species in the river relative to temperature that didn't exist there historically. It existed above Shasta Dam in a system that's entirely spring-fed by, the only glaciers in the west that are still not in full recession, and maintaining the critical life history stage, which is over-summering. So you're trying to replicate an over-summering habitat from a high mountain glacier-fed system below a major dam in the valley, and then leverage from that water benefits for a whole range of other species that people actually care more about because of an industry that's interested in harvesting them. And so, that's definitely a little bit of a curveball in the adaptive management paradigm too.
Yeah, I think that most of our e-flow science comes from the natural hydrograph and trying to replicate functions of the natural hydrograph, but we're in a system where we're trying to provide cold water during a time it would naturally been there, so you're automatically outside of that paradigm. So how do you get these functional flows back in there to be useful and to have that outcome that you're looking for when you're kind of outside that whole conceptual option no longer applies?
Right, and there's a beautiful relationship in nature that is, these things co-evolve with these dynamics. So usually if you restore functionality, you meet the needs of the native species, but not all of that functionality is necessary for each one of those species. So if you have a system where you're trying to balance water delivery and elevated flows, and that thought that Josh showed during a time where those flows wouldn't have been there, how do you, like, how much of that functionality do you give up, and how much do you tailor your system to the few species that you're interested in as a service of the system, versus focusing on those bigger physical dynamics that you know met the needs of all the species, but you don't know exactly which ones met which needs. And so that's another benefit of trying to develop the objective, is to be able to provide a framework to understand, okay, if we are trying to hit species X, Y, and Z, here's the overlap in their needs, here's the places where their needs don't overlap, and here's the best way to create an optimized flow regime given the demands of the working landscape and humans to address those species needs. And in a place like the Central Valley, that's having to deal all over, whereas on the coast, you might just be able to say, like, oh, this is what the river should look like. Let's just do that again, and everything will be fine.
And on top of that, how the river looks like, and the geomorphology. And I mean, that might be a question. Okay, I want to put you in the spot a little bit. I mean, injecting gravel, how sustainable is that?
I mean, economically, I think it's fairly sustainable. I think it's, as far as the amount of money that is spent on the environmental, restoration, it's not a big chunk, at least not on the Trinity. We could probably spend a couple $100,000 a year on that.
And then all of that will be washed out?
It'll let.
Does it wash out?
Yeah, so I would agree that, gravel injection is probably one of the more affordable ways to create flooding habitat. It doesn't involve, for instance, getting mechanical devices out in a river and creating, habitat. You just dump it over the side of the river, and the river does the work. But this year is a good example where those flood releases, I think one of my colleagues put a couple thousand tons of gravel in the river, and it moved, 4 miles down the river and filled in all the pools, right? And so when you think about it from like a budget perspective, these rivers are all in really large deficits. And so, it's going to take a lot to get them back to some kind of level where, it's not moving down the river anymore. And it's totally unpredictable when you're going to have that right here, and you're going to get flood releases, and there's 60,000 CFS that mobilizes 3,000 tons of gravel. It's amazing the magnitude of how much is moving in the river when you have these large flows. The magnitude of these flows, it's different than a heat flow, right? I mean, it's earth moving. Yeah, there's a great article on that this last fall about earth moving and how species move the earth, and the river really moves the earth. So.
And then probably methane moves in the 10 years.
That's right.
Yeah. Maybe since 2011, we were making these little spawning habitat areas in the American River, and they looked exactly the same year after year.
Yeah, and actually, there's some regions in the Trinity, because that whole notion of gravel deficit is something that is very widespread idea. But there's regions in the Trinity where I think, the water got shut off for 20 years, and the tributaries kept pumping them in, and some places are really full of gravel, more than they would get. Once you get to the right place in the river.
What would be really amazing is if somebody did an analysis that quantified Mother Nature's cost share on one of these systems throughout time and total it all up. And then you really have a basis for understanding what the externality from something like a dam or a suite of levees over time is in terms of dollars.
And just here, for example, you said $200,000 a year to gravel is stretchful. On Trinity, if that makes an additional 1,000 acre foot available for sending down to the Central Valley project, that's pretty cheap water. especially because you generate about $50 an acre foot just from the hydropower.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I don't think it doesn't say water to do that, but you're right. I mean, the value of the water that we're releasing is a much bigger cost than the gravel. And, you know, and that gravel number is just an estimate.
Yeah,
It's probably, you know, it's really, yeah, it's not that much. I mean, one thing we see on the Trinity is the gravel doesn't always go anywhere anyway. So
You're not giving water
yeah, we don't have enough water for it to go anywhere.
I mean, I know other systems that they are injecting gravel. Do you know any other ones?
The American, the Stanislaus, the Sacramento, the Cuba, yeah.
And
Clear Creek, don't forget Clear Creek.
I think I just heard that project didn't happen or something.
You mean the rehab project this year?
Well, it's something, I don't know, 3 years ago, I heard there was $2 million for a gravel augmentation in Lower Clear Creek or something like that, and then it heard it didn't happen.
It's happening.
Oh, okay. Weird.
Every now and then you get delayed because of permitting issues, but usually when the money's there for gravel. I mean, gravel is a non-controversial action. Everybody likes to do gravel. That's not one that's going to get held up too often. It's more that, I mean, it's
People like to do it instead of
yeah.
You want to do some gravel projects?
Right.
Maybe it's something we have to get around the levy setback. You're in that town.
Yeah. I mean, Rene has an interesting point because I think in the past, all habitat restoration has been gravel in the tributaries, and that's what people like to do. And now I think there's somewhat of a shift where people are talking more about marine habitat. And that's a tough one because you need the flow to make it function. So it's a little bit harder. It's less controversial. It's a little bit more controversial than the gravel.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting when you put that because, you know, gravel and then switching to varying habitat. Because what I'm thinking is that a lot of the gravel projects have been conceived as farm habitat. And in the past, they, you know, go in, even put in like wire gabions and stuff in the rivers for the gravel. They could pile it in there and have a spawning bed and it wouldn't go away. And that's changed to where, you know, well, we don't try to build spawning habitat. We want the gravel to move and create varying habitat. You know, so there's a shift in the curve.
All right, so I'll ask one question. One of the interesting things that the Trinity River program I've noticed has been able to do is because you essentially had to miniaturize your system, you're limited to 11,000 CFS, which is a fraction of what it used to be. And so things like doing the gravel indention actually helps because you're helping to create and put that floodplain or overbank habitat there in the channel. In the SAC, it's totally different. It is completely levee. So would gravel augmentation work in the SAC? Do you need to do something different? Could you do some kind of combination of both? Like how would you help to better connect the flow to the channel in the SAC to help improve use?
So, want to go? Because the Sacramento is a really interesting system. I mean, it's got different reaches to it that have really different potentialities, and you have to look obviously at how it's being used. So in the upper Sacramento, there has been gravel enhancement that happened back in the 70s. Project here. It was monitored, and people were like, oh look, they're using it, and then they stopped doing it for 20 years. So I think that there's a new focus in the last 3 or 4 years. Fish and Wildlife and Reclamation and DWR and DFW have been working with the Western Shasta RCP and other organizations to really focus on designing and implementing gravel enhancement projects, and then also opening up some of the disconnected side channels and split those, similar to the kinds of things that they've been doing with large, manipulating habitat and mechanical habitat rehabilitation on the Trinity River. Up in the upper Sacramento, Red Bluff Conversion Dam. But then when you get down to the Red Bluff Conversion Dam, the system really changes, and the function of that, what's going on biologically, really changes. And you end up having more of a meandering river, and that goes down, for over 100 miles, maybe 150 miles through a lot of agricultural area, and then it ends up in a levee system where you have weirs that go into floodplains, and it turns out that that area is very habitat limited compared to the upper Sacramento and even the Delta. That seems to have quite a bit of habitat given the number of fish that actually make down there. So each of these areas have very different potentialities, and try and get fish out, I think in the middle of the Sacramento River and upper Sacramento River and side channels in areas that can be inundated with higher flows, and potentially even flows that aren't release flows. There are a lot of tributaries that contribute in the winter and spring, and we've seen, recently there's a lot of interesting papers out about how fish that are born in the upper Sacramento River are actually using non-natal tributaries in the middle of Sacramento and lower Sacramento River. So they'll veer off the Sacramento River when they have the potential to use that habitat, and they probably use more of the habitat that existed. So.
I think, built in what Josh is saying, just to extract it, you could probably get a sense of the relative potential of projects just by looking at the physical scale of change spatially over time. So even though that upper part of the river has been really impacted, the physical impact spatially is much smaller. Like the percentage of river area relative to historic is much closer than in those lowland areas where you have these massive floodplain complexes and et cetera. So I think that just gives a really great sense of, okay, which life history stages depending on which sections of river, and then you have a sense of like the magnitude of which we should be focusing on them. And then you add to that sort of the extra factor of what we were talking about earlier, what our management plan is going forward. Like if we're intending to continue to maintain winter run downstream of Shasta, then we probably have to factor all that they've lost above into our assessment of wherever we expect them to be now. In terms of thinking about the scale of the change and our expectations of what we can get out of the recovery action.
Talking about the water quality, guys, and just in terms of the other things besides just the flow, there's one of the graphs I did to reclamation of EC and temperature, I guess. How do you manage for those objectives, and are there any other water quality related objectives present, and how would you do that?
Yeah, so temperature is a really interesting one. Temperature requires making predictions about the potential to manage temperature in August and September and October, during February and March. So we have to use forecast information about water year type and what the potential additional reservoir inflows are going to be even before we have the wettest part of the year, for making decisions about how we're going to operate and balance, diversions and allocations of water to different water customers, as well as temperature management. That's one of the reasons why, especially basically, is we're releasing very low flows right now. Not because there's a lot of fall much salmon in the river, but because we're trying to store cold water for August and September and October, which is very difficult planning process, because we don't have a lot of good models to figure out temperature, 6 months in advance, and figure out cold water, all the cold water, pool, inflow, reservoir relationships are all based on historical information, and sort of based on what's been observed in the past. We know that the future and new current conditions aren't necessarily following historic patterns. The Delta water quality is a somewhat different issue because, like I mentioned, the reservoirs take different time, different lengths of time to get down to the Delta. And so they'll take actions that are based upon their operators' experience primarily in operating the system, based on sort of first, can we make releases, and are there things we can do with the directionality of flow during the summertime of operating the Delta cross channel in a different fashion? option, which is a facility that reclamation has that can divert different portions of water either into the interior delta, into the south delta, or to the western delta. And depending on where they need to freshen the water up to deal with water quality, and then they'll try to figure out, do we need to reduce exports or can we maintain exports? It's sort of an iterative process where they look at the system every day as a group of operators, the team, and try to figure out sort of how the system is responding. There's a lot of unknowns in that. A lot of the diversion rates in the delta and the river are not known to the operators at the time they're being done. So not everybody reports what's going on in real time. So there's a lot of reactivity in that. But they try to use historic information to, be proactive as much as possible. Certainly, like, communication is really important in that way. Water users and trying to figure out where water's going. Sometimes you don't know where all the water's going. I mean, there's really weird parts. Like, I recently heard that there's like a large wind event form out in evapotranspiration, removed thousands of CFS in water, and nobody sort of just disappeared from the system, which is amazing to imagine. But you can't really predict when weather is going to drive, the loss of water.
And you're probably glad in the summer you would have lost that water, otherwise it would have been a lot more.
It could have been, yeah, right. So, yeah.
I'll ask one maybe last question. We all have a burning. Okay, go for it.
Now so we're moving water from the Trinity to the Sacramento. The Sacramento is also providing some support for the environment. And I'm seeing this kind of relationship with 2 or 3 rivers that they are moving water, and then the river that is importing the water may depend on the water that is being imported. Sacrificing, I'm not sure if it is sacrificing, but there is a fine line between supporting water in one river that is also exporting water to support the environment in another river. And yeah, I don't know, that's the agencies, are they coordinating? Are you aware of that? Do you know what are the boundaries? At which point you need to say, okay, we are now at a point of deciding on one river to the other. Do you have any sense of that? Yes, no?
Well, what I can say about that, you know more than I'm sure. As far as reclamation is concerned, the Trinity is part of the Sacramento River Basin. So, and that's operated as part of the Central Valley Project. These guys figured it out, I guess, when they want to take our water.
And the snack's also going to be the same team. So like really a lot of times it comes down to what type of water year is it and where are the senior water rights. I mean, in the end of the drought, the exchange contractors took the Bureau to court to get 87% of their allocation, and they got water from the San Joaquin, the Sac, and the Klamath via the Trinity. So that was just a function of that particular year. There's a deficit, and who has the most right to the resources that are available. But in other years, those where there's more water, they might be doing the planned releases to meet all the regulatory requirements on all 3 of those rivers, and
I'm a fish biologist, so I don't ultimately make any operational decisions. I think that's one of the interesting challenges, and I think, I see it as one of the sort of opportunities to figure out how you can improve, restoring fish populations or protecting against extinction if conditions are really bad. And we all know that, populations haven't really at least on the Central Valley side, improved dramatically over the last 20 years. So, we're mostly in trying to protect mode, not maintain mode. But I think that's one of sort of the again, the glass is half full, even though we're in extinction, we're protecting for a couple of endangered species. One of the opportunities is to try to figure out how you can meet the demands of humankind and also try to meet the demands of the environment. And environmental flows are probably part of that portfolio, but it requires creativity. And so that's where the opportunity is to hopefully have these institutions try to find a little bit more creativity than they did in the past. I think the Trinity River program is actually a really good example of that. These programs take time. I mean, I'm sure it's different now than it was in 2001 or 2002 when you started. In 15 years, I mean, that's 5 cohorts of salmon, 1 generation of manager, or agency staffing cohort. So these things, they take time.
And I think it's hard enough to make decisions about flows when you're on one river.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, we still don't know enough to really be able to do that well, but now you're taking like the whole state almost and all these interconnected rivers, and you're trying to make decisions about what's going on in one river, but you don't have all the information because a lot of that water is going to be delta water quality, and you don't, some of it's coming from Shasta and some of it's coming from Folsom, and it's just too complex for one human to do. And I think it argues for having a good science program that has a lot of models that support decision making, because we just can't keep all that information. I mean, it's just impossible that we can keep all that information in our minds. And I think we haven't done a great job of doing that. I think they've done it on a more of an operations standpoint, but from the environmental side, we don't have that kind of link set of hypothesis-driven models that help us do that balancing between uses and between rivers. And I mean, it's just a really hard, complex problem.
And there is some advantage for a variety of different groups to not having it all work as one giant integrated system, because right now in our sort of mode of decision making based on oppositional politics, if you out-argue your neighbor in the regulatory context, then you don't have to give up as much of your resource, independent of whether or not in some sort of unimpaired flow scenario you would be giving up a relatively higher percentage versus what they're giving in order to balance the whole equation. And I think there ultimately in the long run is a real opportunity in creating transparency, getting on the same page about what the information is, and finding alignment between these things being managed as disparate, even though they are obviously connected. We're in the transitional space right now, and there's a lot of people who are struggling with how to negotiate that change in the way that their core mode of doing business operates.
Yeah, what?
I always have the mic. I don't know very much, so easy. The Shasta case is really interesting. The conversations that I've heard on it. Say we're in a dry year this year. We probably have enough water for the normal winter run salmon operation this year. It's usually the third dry year, fourth dry year, that you really get slammed because there's not much water in Shasta to become cold over the winter anyway. And so basically after the third or fourth year, you're sort of operating with whatever little nature gave you and whatever stays cold at the bottom all the way through. So it seems like you have sort of a two hedging in reservoir operation theory land, sort of two reservoir hedging problems. One is in the first dry years, you cut back on your releases to keep more water in the reservoir for what might be long drought. And then certainly in the later years, do you want to cut back on the salmon flows early in the season, probably kill some of the eggs off, kill off some of the reds, but that would help ensure that you have enough cold water left to get those remaining eggs all the way through the season. Do people think of those terms?
So I think you know more than you're letting on.
I have some
But, I mean, I think there is active discussion is the best way to meet temperature management needs for incubating generational eggs over the summer. And there is, discussion and debate about even what the, sort of the physiological basis of temperature relationship to survival. And, is it something where you need to have cold water during the entire period, or are there periods when you can have, water that's 2 degrees warmer, and then there's a period when you have a lot of cells in the egg, and it's really important. There's a high oxygen demand, and it's really important to have cold water, and then afterwards, there's a little bit less of a need for that. So there is a lot of active discussion about that, and I think it's important that so that we can sort of plan our science and do the necessary experiments and try to actually get better information so that when we do have a multi-year drought, we know what we're doing. We need to sort of put some planning into that science and into a science program of some sort to make sure that we're asking the right management questions and then prioritizing those effectively to figure out if there's really alternative hypotheses, which one do we want to believe in next time. We have a pretty good idea for what doesn't work after the last drought. When you're talking about lessons learned, I think we've learned what doesn't work, which you can't simply keep the temperature 1 degree warmer for the entire period. That doesn't really work that well. And I think that in critical dry periods, it's really important as a protection against extinction to think about things that are not in the river. So temperature management strategies that aren't related to having eggs in the river. So increasing egg take, hatcheries or something that was done during the last drought, and probably the only reason why we have any returning fish this year, and probably next year will be impacted as well. And maybe there are other alternate, fish management actions that need to happen as well. And all that should be off-the-shelf contingencies, right, for when that happens.
So you know what's going to happen.
Right, and it doesn't work, right? So,
and everything is also that we're always affected with the drought, right? There's always an interest in squeezing more water out of the river. It's sort of like drinking during pregnancy. Like in this period, you know it's a bad idea. And then open question, and the rest of the time there is research either way. And so usually people end up picking the research that's most convenient to the rest of whatever their interests are. Not the one that's most protected.
Sound science and science and sound good.
Right.
I have one more question though. We're here at the university. What should we be doing? We don't have the same kind of programmatic restrictions and mandates restrictions that you all have, either for NGOs or for agencies. What kind of things should we be doing, or students should be doing to help out with this in the long term? We have a longer horizon that we can look at these days and what agencies and NGOs.
One thing I would suggest that I'll state this as a positive and a negative, but I think a huge opportunity of institutions is to use science in that way that articulates a vision and isn't encumbered by a lot of the existing structures and bureaucracy that I've been talking about today. So, for example, if I was coming from the university and I was going to write an article about whether or not I thought the Twin Tunnels were a good idea, I would have it being from the university stress whether or not I thought in the long term they were good for the environment, not what I thought like the current political climate would allow. But to me, that's the opportunity of the university. And I think Davis is sort of in California really uniquely positioned to bring that voice in because the direct linkages with resource management are made. And the opportunity of those linkages is having that dialogue. And the downside about those linkages is that the encumbered thinking from resource management has a tendency to bleed into the university more because the linkages are there. So, you know, I think it's like we all have a role to play in the dialogue, and our perspectives are invariably affected by the position that we come from. And the more that we work together, the more tendency there is to kind of adopt a single mode of thinking, but actually the real strength is in maintaining the difference in a perspective and then figuring out how those different perspectives work together to produce sort of like a higher level outcome.
I think too, one thing that's can be really frustrating from an institutional perspective is that your alternatives that you're considering are really constrained. It's really constrained by what's been done in the past or what's perceived to be possible or politically feasible. And I think one thing coming from an academic perspective is you can push away some of those bounds. I mean, even looking at flows, we often, you know, I worked with Fish and Wildlife Center for 5 years, so I'm still, you know, thinking of that, but we often don't look at anything beyond what we think could actually get released. And so if you don't know kind of the broad bounds of what could happen, even if you don't think you'd ever be able to do it, there's no way to really know what your response would be within what you think is possible, if that makes sense. Like just push away the constraints and look at all these kind of novel, creative solutions, even if you don't think it would happen, just so we can get a response there. You know, where are we in that response relationship? And is there somewhere like a threshold we might cross to push it a little bit farther?
It seems to me that a lot of the agencies in the management world, there's a lot of assumptions. You know, maybe you call it dogma even. You know, where you know the agency and the people in the programs believe a certain thing to be this is how things are, and I think maybe the academic world can help by maybe being the ones that sort of call us out on these things. You know, they're like, wait a minute, that assumption that you guys are working on, is that really the right assumption? Because you know it's I see a lot of that.
So I would just add, see if you can find someone who your advisor knows in the agency who could be a mentor and someone to talk to or have coffee with a couple times a year about your project. Don't wait until you're actively looking for a job to start talking to people in the agency, because what you might find is they'll have a perspective that's useful to you, and you might bring something people then that's outside of the bubble or outside of the box, you know. Because we are generally constrained often by participants in the process. And so, you know, that and also presenting at places where agencies are participating, I think like the California Water Environmental Modeling Forum, their interagency ecological program, the professional society, professional workshops that are slightly spun towards application, right?
I think that's great. You guys have any more questions? We'll call it. Okay, thank you guys so much.